Hi, I'm Steve Whaley with Bluebird, and welcome to a Bird's Eye View podcast episode, Alternatives to Diesel-Powered Buses. Today, my guest is the Director of Transportation with the South Carolina Department of Education, Mike Bullman.
Thanks for having me today, Steve. I'm very honored to be here and again to share my insight.
Tell us a little bit about your role with South Carolina, and when and why did you start adopting alternatives to diesel buses?
Well, my role with the Department of Education as Transportation Director really encompasses the entire fleet of school buses in South Carolina. We're unique, unlike most other states, all other states actually. The Department of Education owns and maintains the entire fleet of school buses statewide.
What? The entire state?
Yeah, we have about 5,600 buses right now, and so we looked at years ago, 6 or 8 years ago, looking at ways as the cost of diesel buses continued to rise, the cost to maintain those buses continued to rise. We started looking at alternatives to the diesel platform. Certainly, some of the first models, if you will, to come around, or applications would be propane. We even went down the road of CNG for a while. We had one CNG. And then, of course, as EV becomes more prevalent, we're looking into that as well. Gasoline, we probably, we have a 3-year contract in South Carolina on new buses. And so 2 contracts ago, 6 years ago, we had gasoline on the solicitation. Unfortunately, we didn't purchase any at the time, but we're really going to look hard. Our contract renewal is in next May of 2025, and so we're going to look real hard at putting gasoline back on the contract.
Okay. So you talked about diesel getting more expensive. Is it the diesel engine, or is it more the after treatment that's getting expensive? And to maintain, how does that work?
Well, we think it's a combination of all those things. Certainly, the initial cost continues to rise as emission standards continue to evolve and get tighter and stricter. The cost that drives the cost up. As you know, you got 2027. There'll be another real heavy emissions change then, and so we expect and anticipate an increase in that platform just on engine related components. And obviously, once the bus is put into service, then you've got the maintenance and operation of the bus. While they are very economical in terms of fuel economy, that's only part of the story. You've got that's being offset by DEF and after treatment. That's certainly the cost for a technician to do things like regens and those kinds of things as well. So I think it's a combination of all those things that continues to have fleets seek alternatives to that platform.
Sure, and diesel prices fluctuate depending on what's happening around the world. So, all right, so we have gasoline, we have electric, and we have propane, and the one CNG that's right. Not there anymore. I don't believe anybody actually makes a CNG school bus today. But in those 3, gasoline, electric, and propane, what's the criteria for acquiring those? What kind of duty cycles do you put them in? What makes it happen?
We certainly work real close with district transportation directors in terms of what might be the best route, what might be the best driver, and overall application to put the individual powertrains in. For instance, as we all know, diesel has the longest range, so there's really no range anxiety with the diesel bus, and so
and you can get diesel,
right, get it anywhere, right? It's available and those kinds of things. So that's really doesn't cause anyone any heartburn, so to speak. But when you start getting into the other platforms, particularly things like propane and electric, there are some pain points. You have a little range anxiety, but we work real hard at making sure that those buses are put on a route that's really applicable to that platform, and it works out real well. We don't have any issues with range. Again, we have a relatively small state in terms of the geographical size of the state, And so being able to use any of those, with the exception of EV, of course, that range is still limited, and it is relegated for the most part to a route that is just to and from school. But again, we make sure
no field trips and so forth on that. So what kind of range are you getting out of an EV, and what kind of range are you getting out of propane?
So we'll get a usable range out of an EV about 100 miles.
Okay.
And that's give or take. Obviously, that's there's some environmental things there, topography, those kinds of things, and certainly the driver. The driver plays a huge role, even more so than the diesel's forgiving in that area, but certainly the EV.
And with regenerative braking and things like that, if you use it properly, you can extend those.
Exactly.
If you drive it the way it needs to be driven.
So that's one of the pieces that we look at when really implementing an EV into a program. Is making sure that we select the working with the school district, making sure that we select the proper driver. Driver training is key. It's the foundation to make sure that driver's familiar with the platform, and that they really fully utilize the benefits of regenerative braking and things like that.
Sure. All right. So 100 miles on EV. What kind of range are you getting out of your propane?
We'll get 350, 400 miles out of propane.
Oh, so we're talking activity stuff now.
Yeah, we can do some activities with propane. Now, we don't typically do anything across the state, but again, I think it really comes down to just diversification. I think the diesel will have a place, at least in the foreseeable future, but I think that it is wise to start looking at how you could diversify your fleet. I just think that the opportunity is really presenting itself well right now.
Okay. So when it comes to, hey, am I going to get these on gasoline or get these on electric and these on propane, where does the financial part of that acquisition come into play?
Well, certainly that's, as you might well imagine and certainly understand, that plays a huge part of that. We look at the EV, for instance. Mm-hmm. I don't, and we haven't to date, and I don't really see us doing this in the foreseeable future, making an EV purchase without being subsidized funding-wise in some way.
And there are a lot of funding opportunities now. So
Absolutely.
Taking advantage of those is the smart thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're constantly looking at other funding sources and how we can subsidize the purchase of EV buses and associated infrastructure. Propane, while very, very comparative to diesel in terms of the initial cost, we will buy propane outright. We did get into the propane side through the Volkswagen settlement funding. It was just an opportunity for us to start out. We commonly refer to it as a pilot, but it has grown into really an integral part and an important part of our fleet.
How many propane buses are in South Carolina now?
We have 453.
450.
So that accounts for about 9% of our route fleet. Mm-hmm. And we have another 50 buses on order. So again, that'll get us close to the 10% mark, and our goal is to continue to look at maybe 15-20% of the fleet with propane.
Good deal. How many electric buses do we have now?
So we have 100. We have 164 that we won on an EPA grant.
Okay, the clean school bus.
Yeah, that's correct. Mm-hmm. And we have right now we have 8 of those in operation, and as we continue to roll out infrastructure and get all of those deployed and operational.
Sure. Now, infrastructure you brought up. This is key. Diesel you can get pretty much anywhere, and you probably have diesel refueling places at the district level. Or is that bought off the street?
Well, it's statewide contract on diesel fuel, and because we are responsible for the service and the maintenance of the bus, that's part of the agency's responsibility. So we almost all of our diesel fueling it's wet hosed or mobile fueling. Oh, okay. Our trucks. So we own a fleet of those trucks. Oh. We have about 60 fuel trucks, and so our technicians will go out and fuel the buses. So that's how the diesel is fueled.
Sure.
Now, districts do have the option that if they're out and about and need fuel, they can purchase it retail.
Mm-hmm.
But again, with the range of a diesel bus, that's really doesn't happen.
But it's the biggest fear that most people have now of, how do I get infrastructure for alternatives, especially, with EV and propane, because that's not common. Gasoline, sure, I can get that anywhere. But how do you work with getting that infrastructure? Let's start with EV. What does that look like?
Well, I think the first thing is to have is to reach out, if you're considering EV, to reach out to your utility providers. I think that is key. First and foremost, they need local infrastructure. It would do you no good to be prepared to deploy EVs and then the local utility provider doesn't have the infrastructure to support it. So I think that's one of the first things to do. And then again, you look at what the general area may be. Is it suited for EV? Is this topography maybe right or wrong for EV? And then I think at least right now, until technology matures, and it's maturing rapidly, and range will increase. But right now, with range being as it is, I think it's wise to make sure that, again, you're putting those buses on a route and limiting the number in terms of a percentage of an individual fleet. Right now, we'll take a school district, and we want to make sure that there's no more than, say, 2 to 3% of their individual fleet being electric.
Okay.
And but that gives them options. They're still able to run the long trips, the activity trips. They're still able to do double routes and those kinds of things. Again, the driver shortage is driving a lot of this different mindset and from an operational standpoint with routes and things like that. So again, we're making sure that we incorporate just a small number right now. But again, we plan to grow that as technology matures, as more commercial charging stations become available, and those kinds of things.
Sure. So when you look over at propane's infrastructure, what does that look like? With EV, you're going to the public utility, making sure that the power can get there, and you have enough places, to pick some real winners for success in setting up the infrastructure. But what about the propane infrastructure? How do you make that happen?
Yeah, propane is quite a bit easier. Propane is really again, we work with propane provider there. We typically have a contract on propane, and sometimes that is in combination with infrastructure. Other times it's separate, but nonetheless, that infrastructure is relatively inexpensive, certainly compared to EV. And in terms of getting it deployed, it's really not very intrusive at all. It's above ground tanks and that sort of stuff. So within
and it's so clean. The EPA doesn't even regulate. You can't spill it.
Absolutely.
Like gasoline and diesel, the risk mitigation for those tanks is pretty high. But on the propane side,
right. And to your point, it's so clean. And again, one of those things that we don't have to worry about. Our model for propane deployment is to allow the district drivers to fuel them.
Oh.
And so that really accomplishes a number of things. One, the districts like that model because it takes away, maybe for lack of a better term, some restrictions in terms of a fueling cycle. So if you got the diesel, they'll have a particular fueling day, and it may be every third day or every fourth day or something like that. And so on those fuel days, they're restricted. If they've got a lot of activities to run that day, they have to wait for the fuel truck and those kinds of things. And so one of the things that we do with a propane deployment is in allowing the district staff to fuel the buses. We set up the infrastructure. Of course, we provide all that through the DOE. And then the driver is responsible for fueling their own bus. And we don't care if they fuel it at 2 a.m. or if they fuel it at 4 a.m. in the morning before a route. We really don't set any limitations or restrictions on that. They can fuel it multiple times a day. And so they like that flexibility.
Well, with 400 miles, they'd be going a long way.
A long way.
What about just sharing of infrastructure? If they're doing inter-district, events and things like that, have we progressed to a point yet of being able to, fuel at other districts that have that same propane infrastructure set up?
Yes, yes, of course. We can have fueling systems, digital or smart fueling systems that are able to track that, what vehicle it was fueled and what operator or driver actually did the fueling. And so, again, yes, that is part of the model that we use, making sure that we can share infrastructures across the state. We purposely, when we deployed the propane from the beginning, made sure that we strategically placed our propane locations so that if a bus needed to go across the state, they could actually go, from one end of the state to the other, refuel, and then go back if they needed to. Again, with a 400-mile range, it's rare, but there might be some cases where they did some trips while they were at a particular location and they need to refuel.
Sure. Now, you mentioned drivers filling up the propane, and I imagine the drivers then would also be responsible for plugging in the bus to charge it and all of the management of those systems. What do the drivers think of this? I mean, when you first introduced this and when you expanded to a new area where, it's only been diesel there before, human nature's resistance to change plays a pretty big part. So how has, the EV buses and propane buses been received, and what do they think?
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, I mean, that's a great question. Certainly they were a little apprehensive maybe because, you hear all these things, and I think there's a lot of things associated with EV, such as maybe Tesla and all the that's in the automotive market. And so while they were excited, but they were a little anxious and apprehensive at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I go back to the training. We worked real hard, not only from the operational characteristics of the bus and those kinds of things, but certainly the fueling and how that all works. And I say fueling because that's really what it is. You plug it in and we're using electricity as opposed to any other fossil fuel or anything like that. And so we really think that, again, that's not going to be a problem at all. We also look for, at each district, we try to find the driver or the drivers that can be an ambassador for that platform, an evangelist, if you will.
Sure.
If they're
ones who have influence and
exactly buy in. We find that they're certainly going to operate the bus based on, again, as you've already alluded to, regenerative braking and things like that really can maximize range. And so once you do that, I think it just sets the program up for success.
Sure. Okay. What about the mechanics now? Diesel mechanics are, kind of the top of the food chain when it comes to working on, automotive, service work. What's it like for them now to introduce, EV buses and propane buses? Because propane is not a compression ignition; it's a spark ignited engine, like gasoline. So, how does the whole service and mechanic roll out? How's that been going?
Well, I think so. I'll just take those one at a time. If you look at propane, they're as you mentioned, it is a spark-fired versus a compression-fired engine, but nonetheless, they're familiar with the internal combustion engine. So again, they didn't really look at that as being that much different than the diesel. And as a matter of fact, it's much simpler than the diesel. You look at a modern...
the after treatment doesn't exist on that propane bus like it does on a diesel.
You look at the complexities of a modern diesel engine, they're far greater than a propane engine today. And so that technician really got into that space quickly and really had no problems adapting and learning the little nuances that was around propane. And so that wasn't a real problem. The EV, of course, it being all this mysterious, things, the big, huge batteries and high voltage and all those kinds of things. And so that created some high levels of anxiety. Again, through training and through education, we've been able to really
demystify it.
Right, exactly. For lack of a better term, you're exactly right. And so our techs really now look forward to that. They look forward to the overall reduced maintenance. And so they're excited, much longer brake life and no oil changes and all those things that just go away when you move into that space.
Terrific. Well, I really appreciate you investing the time with us. if you could give a bit of advice for transportation directors who are in this diesel world now, but pretty much know that they have to start adopting alternatives, what advice would you give them?
I would just say again, continue to be open-minded. I think today more than at any other time in certainly our history, school bus history, I think it's time to look at fleet diversification when it comes to the powertrain and the power plant. There's no better time. There's plenty of opportunities out there. And again, I think with diesel, while I don't think it's going away tomorrow, that cost is going to continue to escalate, as we've already said from the beginning. And I think it's really there's some funding opportunities out there to help with some of these other platforms. And again, I think just educate, do your research, and I think
talk to your friend.
Absolutely,
You've already been there.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
All right, I'll give out your number later.
Yeah, that'll work. I'll be glad to help.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
This has been a bird's eye view of alternatives to diesel-powered buses.